I was clutching a worn notebook when my stepmother's voice sliced through the conversation at our family dinner. She stood by the kitchen counter, wine glass in hand, her lips curved in a smile that never reached her eyes. "It's amazing how Oliver has achieved so much despite his challenges," she said, her words dripping with honeyed venom. "Some children are just born with disadvantages. It's not their fault, of course." My father cleared his throat awkwardly, while the rest of the family shifted in their seats. No one made eye contact with me or my 12-year-old son, who sat beside me, his shoulders hunched as if trying to disappear. Before I could respond, my stepbrother Marcus chuckled and added, "Yeah, well, some mistakes can't be fixed, right?" The words hung in the air like smoke. I felt my son's body go rigid next to mine. Then, without warning, Oliver stood up. His thin frame seemed to stretch taller as he reached into his backpack and pulled out a folded piece of paper. "Actually," he said, voice steady despite the slight tremor in his hands, "I have something I want to read." He unfolded the paper carefully, like it was made of glass. "It's something my dad wrote about me before he left." The room fell silent. Every eye was on my son, this child they had dismissed for years, as he prepared to read words they never expected to hear. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Maya. I'm 34 years old, and I've been raising my son Oliver on my own since he was 3. His father, Daniel, walked out on us after years of struggling with addiction and depression. He promised to get better, to come back when he was whole again. We waited. Months turned to years. Oliver grew from a toddler to a boy who stopped, asking when Daddy was coming home. Daniel's departure wasn't dramatic. No slammed doors or screaming matches. Just a note on the kitchen table one Tuesday morning and the echo of absence in our small apartment. For 9 years, we've received occasional postcards from different cities, brief phone calls on birthdays, and child support payments that arrive sporadically, like afterthoughts. My family never approved of Daniel. To them, he was a dreamer without direction, a man with talent but no ambition. When I met him at an art exhibition featuring his photography, I fell for his vision of the world, how he captured light in forgotten places, how he spoke about beauty in broken things. But my family saw only his irregular income, his unconventional background, his struggles with mental health. When I became pregnant at 22, their disappointment was palpable. My father, Richard, a corporate attorney with political ambitions, offered to take care of it in a hushed conversation over lunch. When I refused, his support became conditional. He would help us financially, but only if I got serious about my life. Getting serious meant finishing my business degree instead of pursuing writing, finding a corporate job with benefits, and essentially pretending that Oliver wasn't the result of a relationship they considered a mistake. I did what I had to do. I finished my degree. I took the sensible job at my father's friend's marketing firm. I moved into a modest but respectable apartment in a good school district. I became exactly what they wanted, a single mother who didn't make waves, who showed proper gratitude for their help, who acknowledged her poor choices through a lifetime of penance. But Oliver, my bright, sensitive, artistic Oliver, was the living reminder of what they considered my greatest failure. Not because there was anything wrong with him, but because he existed at all. Because he had Daniel's eyes, his creative temperament, his way of seeing the world sideways. Because he was half made of someone they wanted to forget. After Daniel left, my father remarried. Caroline was 15 years his junior, perfectly coiffed, and determined to remake our family in her image. She brought along her son from a previous marriage, Marcus, who was 2 years older than Oliver, and everything my family thought a boy should be: athletic, confident, conventionally successful. The contrast between the cousins became Caroline's favorite subtle weapon. "Oliver's quite sensitive, isn't he?" she would say, when my son teared up at a sad movie. Marcus was never like that. Or, have you considered team sports for Oliver? They might help with his social difficulties. Each comment was a paper cut, small enough to seem insignificant, deep enough to sting for hours afterward. I should have defended him more fiercely. I should have pushed back against the narrative they created about my son. But somewhere along the way, I had learned to swallow my anger, to smile through the insults, to prioritize peace over protection. I told myself that family was important, that Oliver needed his grandfather in his life, that maintaining these relationships was worth the occasional discomfort. That's what I thought anyway, until the night of my father's 60th birthday. Dinner, when everything changed. We had been invited to my father's house for what Caroline called an intimate family celebration. 16 people crammed around an extended dining table, with hired servers circulating appetizers and refilling wine glasses. Oliver had spent the afternoon carefully wrapping his gift for his grandfather, a hand-drawn comic book about a superhero lawyer who fought for justice. He was so proud of it, showing me each page before sliding it into an envelope. "Do you think Grandpa will like it?" he asked, his eyes wide with hope. "He'll love it," I assured him, though a voice in the back of my mind whispered that my father had never quite understood Oliver's creative gifts. We arrived exactly on time, Oliver in his only button-up shirt, me in a dress I'd splurged on after my recent promotion. Caroline greeted us with air kisses and immediately directed us to the far end of the table, away from my father. Oliver's face fell slightly, but he straightened his shoulders and followed me without complaint. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The evening progressed predictably. My father held court at the head of the table, sharing stories about his legal victories and political connections. Marcus dominated the conversation among the younger cousins, bragging about his recent baseball tournament. Oliver sat quietly, occasionally glancing at the gift bag by his feet, waiting for the right moment to present it. When dinner was served, Caroline clinked her glass for attention. "Before we eat, I'd like to make a toast to Richard," she announced. 60 years of excellence, of making the right choices, of building a legacy to be proud of. Her gaze drifted meaningfully toward Marcus, who sat up straighter, basking in the implied compliment. "To Richard," everyone echoed, raising their glasses. My father stood to acknowledge the toast, beaming with satisfaction. "Thank you all for being here. Family is everything to me. A man's true wealth is measured by the people who carry on his values, his name, his way of seeing the world." He looked directly at Marcus. "Some of you make that incredibly easy." Laughter rippled around the table. I felt Oliver shrink beside me. When the servers began clearing the main course dishes, Oliver whispered, "Can I give Grandpa his present? Now?" I nodded, squeezing his hand under the table. "Go ahead, sweetheart." Oliver stood up, clutching his envelope. He walked hesitantly toward my father, who was deep in conversation with his golf partner. "Excuse me, Grandpa?" Oliver's voice was small but determined. "I made you something for your birthday." My father turned, his expression shifting from annoyance at the interruption to a practiced smile. Thank you, Oliver." He took the envelope and set it aside without opening it. "That's very thoughtful." Oliver stood there for a moment, waiting. When it became clear that my father wasn't going to open the gift, he said, "It's a comic book. I drew it myself. It's about a lawyer superhero like you." "A comic book?" Caroline interjected with a laugh. "How creative. Although Richard was more of a serious reader at your age, weren't you, dear?" Encyclopedia Britannica and biographies of presidents. "I read those too," Oliver said quickly. "I just like drawing stories also." "Well, perhaps that's something you get from your father's side," Caroline said, her smile sharp as a blade. Although I'm not sure being artistic has served him particularly well in life, has it? The table went quiet. My stomach clenched. I started to stand, to intervene, but my voice caught in my throat. That's when my stepbrother Marcus looked directly at Oliver and said, "Yeah, well, some mistakes can't be fixed, right?" I saw the exact moment the word mistake hit my son. The slight widening of his eyes, the color draining from his face, the way his fingers curled into fists at his sides. In that instant, he looked so much like Daniel that my heart ached. I was finally finding my voice, ready to explode with 9 years of suppressed rage, when Oliver did something unexpected. Instead of crying or running away, he reached into his backpack, which he'd left by his chair, and pulled out a folded piece of paper I'd never seen before. "Actually," he said, his voice cutting through the uncomfortable silence, "I have something I want to read. It's something my dad wrote about me before he left." The room stilled. Caroline's smile froze. My father set down his wineglass. Even the servers paused in their movements, sensing the shift in the atmosphere. Oliver unfolded the paper carefully. I recognized Daniel's handwriting immediately. The slanted letters, the heavy pressure of the pen. Where had Oliver gotten this? How long had he been carrying it? "Dear Oliver," he began reading, his young voice clear and steady. "By the time you're old enough to understand this letter, I might not be around anymore. Not because I don't love you. I love you more than anything in this world, but because sometimes love isn't enough to fix what's broken inside a person." Oliver paused, swallowed hard, and continued. "People will tell you that you were a mistake, that you came too early, that you were born from chaos. Don't believe them. You were the only thing in my life that was never a mistake." My breath caught. Caroline's lips pressed into a thin line. My father shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "I look at you sometimes," Oliver read, "when you're concentrating on building with your blocks or drawing your incredible pictures, and I see a mind that works differently than mine, than most people's. You notice things others miss. You feel things others ignore. Some will call this a weakness. They're wrong. It's your superpower." Oliver's voice grew stronger with each word. "The world doesn't make much space for people like us. Dreamers, feelers, the ones who see beauty in broken things. It will try to fix you, to make you practical and efficient and normal. Don't let it. Don't let anyone convince you that the way you experience the world is wrong." Tears were streaming down my face now. I hadn't known Daniel had written this. I hadn't known he'd seen our son so clearly, loved him so completely, even as he was preparing to leave. "I'm leaving because I'm afraid my darkness will eventually dim your light," Oliver continued. "Your mother is strong enough to help you shine. Trust her. She understands you better than you know." Oliver looked up from the letter, his eyes meeting mine across the table. I saw a flicker of something new there, understanding, forgiveness, perhaps even pride. "I won't be the father you deserve," he read, returning to the letter. "And that will be the greatest regret of my life. But know this, you weren't a mistake. You were a miracle. You were the best thing I ever helped create. And no matter what anyone else ever tells you, you were made from love, the real kind. The kind that wants what's best for you, even when it breaks itself apart." Oliver carefully folded the letter and looked directly at Caroline and Marcus. There was no anger in his expression, just a quiet dignity that seemed far beyond his. 12 years. "My dad has problems," he said. "He couldn't stay, but he never thought I was a mistake." He turned to my father. "And I'm not ashamed of being his son." The silence that followed was absolute. No one moved. No one spoke. The weight of truth, simple, unadorned truth spoken by a child, pressed down on all of us. Then my father did something I'd never seen him do. He removed his glasses, set them on the table, and rubbed his eyes. When he looked up, his expression had changed. The practiced politician was gone, replaced by an old man confronting something uncomfortable. "May I see that letter?" he asked. Oliver, his voice unusually gentle. Oliver hesitated, then walked over and handed him the folded paper. My father read it silently, his face unreadable. When he finished, he carefully refolded it and returned it to Oliver. "Thank you for sharing that," he said. I think I would like to read your comic book now." Oliver's eyes widened, in surprise. "Really?" My father nodded. "Really." As Oliver hurried to retrieve the envelope, I caught my father's eye. Something passed between us. Not forgiveness exactly, but an acknowledgement. A crack in the wall we'd built between us. Caroline started to say something, but my father held up his hand, silencing her for perhaps the first time in their marriage. "Not now," he said firmly. The rest of the evening unfolded in a strange new reality. Nothing was resolved. Years of hurt didn't magically disappear, but something had shifted. As Oliver showed my father each page of his comic book, explaining the characters' motivations and adventures, I saw my father actually listening, actually seeing my son perhaps for the first time. On the drive home, Oliver was quiet, looking out the window at the passing streetlights. Finally, he asked, "Are you mad I had Dad's letter?" I reached across the console to take his hand. "No, honey, I'm not mad. I found it last year when we were cleaning out the storage closet," he explained. "It was in an envelope with my name on it. I've been carrying it around ever since." "Why didn't you show it to me?" I asked gently. He shrugged. "I thought it might make you sad. And I kind of liked having something that was just between me and Dad." I nodded, understanding completely. "You were very brave tonight." "I wasn't trying to be brave," he said. "I was just tired of feeling like I had to be sorry for existing." His words broke something open inside me, the last wall I'd built to protect myself from the full force of my anger at how he'd been treated, at how I'd allowed him to be treated. "Oliver," I said, pulling into our apartment complex and turning off the engine. "I need you to hear something from me, okay? You have never, not for one single second of your life, been a mistake. You're the best thing that ever happened to me, and I'm so sorry if I ever made you feel like you had to earn your place in this family." He smiled, Daniel's smile, the one that had first made me fall in love all those years ago. "I know, Mom. That's why I wanted to read Dad's letter. Not for me, for them. And maybe a little bit for you, too." When we got home, I couldn't sleep. I sat at our small kitchen table with a cup of tea, thinking about Daniel's words, about how clearly he had seen our son, about how much love could exist alongside so much pain. I thought about my own complicity in allowing my family to diminish. Oliver, about the 1,000 small surrenders that had led us to tonight. I pulled out my laptop and began to write, not an apology, not a justification, but a declaration. An email to my father that said, simply, "Oliver and I won't be attending Sunday dinners anymore unless things change. He deserves better. So, if you want us in your life, you'll need to earn it." I pressed send before I could second-guess myself. Then I opened a new document and began writing something else. The story I'd been carrying inside me for years. The one about a young woman who found herself through loving a complicated man and raising their extraordinary child. The story I'd been afraid to tell because it didn't fit the narrative my family had created for me. It was nearly dawn when I finished the first chapter. As the sun rose, casting golden light across our small living room, I felt something I hadn't felt in years, possibility. Not certainty, not security, but the wild, terrifying freedom of choosing my own path, of honoring my son's truth, of finally allowing myself to be fully present in my own life. 3 days later, my father showed up at our apartment unannounced. He stood awkwardly in our doorway, looking strangely vulnerable without his usual suit and tie. "May I come in?" he asked. I hesitated, then stepped aside. Oliver was at the kitchen table, working on a new drawing. He looked up, surprised to see his grandfather in our space. "Hi, Grandpa," he said cautiously. My father nodded to him, then turned to me. "I got your email." "And?" I crossed my arms, determined not to make this easy for him. He sighed, running a hand through his thinning hair. "You're right. Things need to change." It wasn't an apology, not exactly. But from my father, it was seismic. "I've been thinking about that letter," he continued, glancing at Oliver. "About what Daniel wrote. He saw something in you that I didn't allow myself to see." Oliver set down his pencil, watching his grandfather carefully. "I was wrong," my father said, the words sounding strange and unpracticed on his tongue. "About a lot of things, about Daniel, about you, Oliver, and about what family should look like." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a business card. "This is the contact information for an art program at the community center downtown. They offer scholarships for talented young artists. I took the liberty of showing them some photos of your comic book." He cleared his throat. They were quite impressed. Oliver's eyes widened. "Really?" My father nodded. "The program director said you have a unique perspective." That's the word she used. Unique. He said it like he was trying out the concept. For the first time, finding that it didn't taste as strange as he expected. It wasn't everything. It wasn't a complete transformation. My father was still my father. Stubborn, controlling, wedded to his vision of success. Caroline was still Caroline. Marcus was still Marcus. One moment of truth didn't erase years of hurt. But it was a beginning. In the weeks that followed, small changes accumulated. My father called Oliver directly to ask about his art projects. He sent books about famous comic book artists and graphic novelists. At the next family dinner, which we attended on our own terms, he publicly shut down Caroline when she made a subtle dig about Oliver's interest in theater. And me? I kept writing. At first just for myself, then for a small online community of single parents I found through a writer's forum. I wrote about Daniel, not as the villain in my story, but as a complex, flawed person who loved deeply, but couldn't overcome his demons. I wrote about raising a sensitive boy in a world that often punishes sensitivity in males. I wrote about finding my voice after years of silence. 6 months after that fateful birthday dinner, I received an email from a literary agent who had read one of my essays online. She wanted to know if I was working on a book. I was. I also received a postcard from Seattle. Daniel's handwriting, familiar after all these years. "Saw a counselor today, first time in 5 years, thinking of you both. Would it be okay to call sometime?" No pressure, just a question. I showed it to Oliver. "What do you think?" I asked him. He considered it thoughtfully. "I think people can change," he said finally. "Not always, but sometimes." I nodded. "Sometimes," I agreed. That night, I found Oliver sitting on his bed, reading his father's letter again. He looked up when I entered. "Do you think Dad meant it?" he asked. "What he wrote about me?" I sat beside him, wrapping an arm around his shoulders. "Every word," I said with absolute certainty. "Every single word. Even the curse part about me having a superpower?" I smiled, thinking about my extraordinary son, how he'd stood tall in that dining room, how he'd spoken truth to power, how he'd forgiven me for my failures, how he saw beauty in broken things. "Especially that part," I told him. "Maybe the most important superpower of all is the ability to see yourself clearly, even when others don't. You've always had that. You've always known who you are." He leaned against me, the letter carefully folded in his hands. "I'm glad Dad wrote this," he said, "even if he couldn't stay." "Me too," I whispered, realizing I meant it completely. We sat together in the quiet of his room, mother and son, surrounded by his artwork, evidence of a mind that worked differently, that noticed things others missed, that felt things others ignored. Not a weakness, a superpower. And in that moment, I understood what Daniel had known all along. Our son was never a mistake. He was exactly who he was meant to be. And finally, after all these years, so was I. The next morning, I woke to the sound of Oliver humming in the kitchen. Following the scent of slightly burnt toast, I found him attempting to make breakfast. 2 plates set on our small table, orange juice poured into mismatched glasses, and peanut butter smeared across bread in thick, uneven layers. He looked up when I entered, his face brightening. "I made breakfast," he announced proudly, "like you do when you're thinking about important stuff." I smiled, taking in this gesture of care from my son. "Thank you. What important stuff do you think I'm thinking about?" He shrugged, suddenly focused on adjusting the position of the napkins. "Maybe about Dad's postcard? Or about Grandpa coming over? Or your writing?" He glanced up. "You stayed up late typing again. I heard the keyboard." I sat down at the table, touched by his observation. It was true. I'd been up until nearly 3 in the morning, the words pouring out of me after years of silence. Stories about Daniel, about Oliver, about the complex tapestry of love and loss that had shaped our little family. "You're right," I admitted. "I've been thinking about a lot of things, including what happens next with Grandpa and everyone else." Oliver nodded solemnly as he joined me at the table. "Are we going to Sunday dinner this week?" The question hung between us. After my father's unexpected visit, we'd received the usual text invitation to the weekly family dinner. I hadn't responded yet, uncertain about re-engaging with a dynamic that had caused so much pain. "Do you want to go?" I asked carefully. Oliver took a bite of his toast, considering. "I think," he said finally, "that Grandpa is trying. And trying is important, right? That's what you always tell me about math." I laughed despite myself. Oliver's struggles with multiplication had been a recurring theme of 4th grade. Yes, trying is important, but so are boundaries. Sometimes we need space from people who have hurt us, even if they're family, especially if they're family. "But how will they learn to be better if we're not there?" he asked, with the simple logic of a child who still believed people could change if given the chance. His question struck me with unexpected force. How indeed? By withdrawing completely, was I actually reinforcing the very dynamic I wanted to break? Or was I finally practicing the self-protection I should have embraced years ago? "That's a really good question," I admitted. "I don't have a perfect answer." Oliver nodded, seemingly satisfied with my honesty. "We could go just once," he suggested, "to see if it's different. And if it's not, we can leave. You always said we should give people second chances, but not third and fourth and fifth ones." I reached across the table to squeeze his hand, marveling at how this child, this boy they had dismissed as oversensitive and impractical, possessed such emotional wisdom. "You're right," I said. "One dinner, we'll go together, and if at any point either of us feels uncomfortable, we leave. No questions asked. Deal?" "Deal," he agreed, offering his sticky hand for a formal shake. As I cleaned up our breakfast, dishes, my phone buzzed with a text. I expected it to be work. The marketing campaign I'd been managing was entering its final phase, but instead, it was from my younger sister, Leah. "Heard you're coming to dinner Sunday. Can we talk before then? Coffee tomorrow?" Leah and I had once been close, but our relationship had fractured after Daniel left. She'd sided with our father, had parroted his opinions about my poor choices. had watched silently during countless family gatherings as Oliver and I were subtly belittled. Her invitation now felt like too little, too late. I started to type. A polite refusal, then paused, thinking about Oliver's words. How will they learn to be better if we're not there? Sure, I texted back. Golden Cup at 10? Her response was immediate. See you then. The Golden Cup was a small coffee shop equidistant between my office and Leah's law firm. As I opened the door the next morning, the familiar scent of espresso and pastries brought back memories of countless sister dates before everything changed. Before Daniel, before Oliver, before the family narrative about me calcified into something I couldn't recognize. Leah was already there, occupying a corner table with 2 mugs. She stood when she saw me, her expression a mixture of hopefulness and uncertainty. At 31, she looked more like our father than I did. The same straight nose, the same calculating eyes, the same air of contained energy. I ordered you a latte, she said as I approached. Still your favorite? I nodded, surprised she remembered. Thanks. An awkward silence fell as we both sat down. 3 years of meaningful conversation had been replaced by surface-level pleasantries at family gatherings. I no longer knew how to talk to the sister who had once been my closest confidant. So, she began, fidgeting with her spoon. Dad came to see you. He did. He told us about it at dinner last Sunday, about Oliver's father's letter. She hesitated. About how he's been wrong about some things. I raised an eyebrow, genuinely surprised. My father rarely admitted being wrong about anything, let alone in front of others. It was unexpected, Leah continued. He seemed different, quieter. He shut Caroline down twice when she started in about Marcus's achievements. Miracles do happen, I said dryly. Leah winced. I deserve that. Do you? I took a sip of my latte, the warm bitterness matching my mood. What exactly did you want to talk about, Leah? She met my gaze directly. I want to apologize for not standing up for you and Oliver, for buying into Dad's narrative about Daniel, about your choices, for being a coward. Her bluntness caught me off guard. Leah had always been diplomatic to a fault, carefully navigating family politics without ever rocking the boat. What changed? I asked. She glanced down at her coffee. Honestly, a lot of things. Therapy, for one. I've been going for about 6 months now. She gave a small, self-deprecating laugh. Turns out working 80 hours a week to please our father isn't great for one's mental health. Who knew? I smiled despite myself. Revolutionary concept. But also, she continued more seriously, what Oliver did at that dinner. Reading. That letter. Standing up for himself and for his dad. It made me realize how long it's been since I stood up for anything that mattered. She looked at me, her eyes suddenly bright with unshed tears. He's an incredible kid, Maya. And I've been a terrible aunt. I've missed so much of his life because I was afraid of being on the wrong side of Dad's approval. The sincerity in her voice cracked something open inside me. A door I had firmly shut years ago when her silence had felt like the final betrayal. He is incredible, I agreed. And yes, you've missed a lot. I'd like to change that, she said quietly. If you'll let me, if it's not too late. I studied my sister's face, searching for the calculation I had come to expect from my family. Instead, I saw only regret and hope. It's not too late, I said finally. But it won't be simple. Oliver and I are a package deal, and I won't expose him to the same treatment anymore, not from anyone. Leah nodded. I understand. I'm not asking for immediate trust. I'm asking for a chance to earn it back. As we finished our coffee, the conversation shifted to lighter topics. Her work, my writing, Oliver's art program. It wasn't the easy rapport we'd once shared, but it was something. A a beginning. When we parted outside the cafe, Leah surprised me with a hug. Brief, but genuine. "See you Sunday," she asked. "We'll be there," I confirmed, "but on our terms." "I wouldn't expect anything less," she said with a smile that reminded me of the sister I used to know. Sunday arrived with a mix of apprehension and determination. Oliver spent the morning carefully selecting his outfit. A button-up shirt with planets on it that he'd picked out himself, paired with his least-worn jeans. "Do I look okay?" he asked, standing in front of the bathroom mirror, attempting to smooth down his unruly hair. "You look perfect," I assured him. "But remember, we're going as ourselves this time. No pretending to be something we're not to make them comfortable." He nodded seriously. "That's why I picked the space shirt. Dad got it for me for my birthday that one year, remember?" I did remember. It had arrived in a package with no return. A dress, just Daniel's distinctive handwriting on the label. Oliver had worn it until the fabric thinned, until it became too small, and then had carefully preserved it in his drawer of special things. "It's a perfect choice," I told him. We arrived at my father's house exactly on time, not early, as had been my anxious habit in the past. Caroline answered the door, her smile stiff but not openly hostile. "Maya, Oliver," she greeted us with a nod. "Everyone's in the living room." We followed her through the familiar hallway. I felt Oliver's hand slip into mine, squeezing gently. A silent reassurance, from child to parent, rather than the other way around. The living room fell quiet as we entered. My father stood up from his armchair, unexpectedly crossing the room to greet us. "Thank you for coming," he said, his voice lacking its usual authoritative boom. He extended a hand to Oliver. "I've been looking forward to hearing about your art program." Oliver glanced at me briefly before shaking his grandfather's hand. "I started a new project this week," he offered. "A graphic novel about a boy who can talk to ghosts." "Sounds fascinating," my father said, and the remarkable thing was, he seemed to mean it. "Perhaps you can tell me more about it over dinner." Marcus slouched on the couch, pointedly absorbed in his phone. Leah caught my eye from across the room and gave me an encouraging smile. My Aunt Patricia, my father's sister, watched the interaction with undisguised curiosity. Dinner was a strange affair. The usual hierarchy of conversation. My father dominating, Caroline orchestrating, everyone else competing for the remaining airtime, had been disrupted. My father directed several questions to Oliver about his art, his school, his interests. Oliver, initially wary, gradually warmed up, explaining the plot of his graphic novel with increasing animation. "The main character doesn't know if the ghosts are real or if he's imagining them," he explained between bites of roast chicken. "But they help him solve problems anyway." "An interesting ambiguity," my father commented. "Reality versus perception." Caroline cleared her throat. "Speaking of school, Marcus has been selected for the advanced math track next year," she interjected, clearly uncomfortable with not being the center of attention. "That's great, Marcus," I said sincerely. Marcus shrugged, pushing food around his plate. "It's whatever. Not like it's art or anything creative." The slight emphasis on the word creative hung in the air. Old habits die hard, and the hierarchy of values in this household had been clear for years. Practical achievements over artistic ones, conventional success over creative fulfillment. But before anyone could respond, my father surprised us all. "Different strengths are valuable in different ways," he said evenly. "The world needs both engineers and artists, both lawyers and writers." His eyes met mine briefly on the last word. I realized suddenly that he must have read some of my published essays. The thought was both unsettling and strangely moving. Caroline's lips pressed into a thin line, but she said nothing further. The conversation moved on to other topics. My aunt's recent vacation, Leah's new case, local politics. It wasn't perfect. The undercurrents of old dynamics still swirled beneath the surface. but it was different. There was space for Oliver and me in a way there hadn't been before. After dinner, while everyone moved to the living room for coffee and dessert, I found myself alone in the kitchen with my father. He was retrieving additional dessert plates from a cabinet, his movements more hesitant than I was used to seeing. "Thank you," he said abruptly, his back still to me, "for coming today, for giving us another chance." "Us or you?" I asked, unable to keep the edge from my voice. He turned then, plates in hand. "Both, I suppose." I've been doing a lot of thinking since that night, about the family I thought I was building versus the one I actually created. He set the plates down on the counter. I didn't want to see Daniel's good qualities because they threatened everything I valued: stability, predictability, control. It was the most self-aware statement I'd ever heard from my father. "And Oliver?" I pressed. "Why couldn't you see him clearly?" My father sighed, suddenly looking every one of his 60 years. "Because he reminded me of parts of myself I worked very hard to suppress. The sensitivity, the creativity, the way he feels everything so deeply." He shook his head. "I wasn't always the man you know, Maya. Before law school, before my practice, I had different dreams once." This was news to me. My father had always presented his life as a straight line from ambition to achievement, a blueprint he expected us all to follow. "What dreams?" I asked. A sad smile crossed his face. "Another time, perhaps. Tonight is about moving forward, not looking back." He picked up the plates again. "But I want you to know that I'm trying to see Oliver. Really see him. And you too." As he moved toward the door, I found myself saying, "It's not too late, you know. To change, to repair relationships." He paused, his back to me again. "Even with Daniel?" The question caught me off guard. "What do you mean?" "His postcard," my father said. "Oliver mentioned it at dinner, about him seeing a counselor, wanting to call." I felt a flicker of annoyance that Oliver had shared that information, quickly replaced by understanding. Of course he would mention it. It was important to him, a hope he had carried quietly since receiving his father's letter. "I haven't decided yet," I admitted. "It's complicated." My father nodded. "Family always is." He turned to face me. "Whatever you decide, I want you to know that I won't interfere this time. Your choices are yours to make." It wasn't quite an apology for his past interference, but it was an acknowledgement. Coming from my father, it felt monumental. When we left that night, Oliver was quieter than usual, processing the evening in his thoughtful way. As we drove home through the darkened streets, he finally spoke. "It was different," he said. "Not perfect, but different." "Yes," I agreed. "It was." "Do you think it will stay different?" he asked. I considered the question carefully. "I think change is rarely linear. There might be setbacks. Old patterns are hard to break. But I do think something fundamental has shifted." He nodded, satisfied with my honesty. Then, after another moment of silence, I told Grandpa about Dad's postcard. "I know, he mentioned it to me." "Are you mad?" I glanced at him quickly, before returning my eyes to the road. "No, I'm not mad. But I am curious why you told him." Oliver fiddled with the seatbelt across his chest. "I thought maybe if Grandpa knew Dad was trying to get better, he might see him differently. Like how reading Dad's letter made him see me differently." The simple wisdom of his strategy struck me deeply. While I had been guarding information, creating walls between the different parts of our lives, Oliver had intuitively understood that vulnerability could be a bridge. "That was very thoughtful," I told him, "and brave." He smiled, pleased with the affirmation. "So, are you going to let Dad call?" the question I'd been avoiding for days. The postcard still sat on my dresser, a physical manifestation of all the complicated emotions I'd been sorting through: hope, fear, lingering anger, cautious optimism. "I'm still thinking about it," I said honestly. "What do you think I should do?" Oliver considered this seriously. "I think," he began slowly, "I think people should get second chances if they're really trying, like how we gave Grandpa one." His simple equation of the situations made me smile despite the weight of the decision. "It's a bit more complicated with your dad," I explained gently. "There's a lot of history there, a lot of hurt." "I know," he said. "But there's good stuff too, right? Like in his letter. He loved us, even if he couldn't stay." In that moment, I saw with perfect clarity that Oliver had always understood more than I gave him credit for. He didn't need protection from the complex truth of his father. He had already been living with it, making sense of it in his own way. "Yes," I acknowledged. "There was a lot of good too." When we arrived home, Oliver headed straight to his room to work on his graphic novel, inspired, he said, by the evening's conversations. I found myself alone in the kitchen, staring at my phone, thinking about second chances and bridges and the courage of my 12-year-old son. Before I could overthink it, I composed a text to the number that had remained unchanged in my contacts for 9 years. "Got your postcard. Oliver and I are open to a call. Let me know when works for you." I pressed send, then set the phone down, surprised by how light I suddenly felt. Not because I expected miracles, not because I believed everything would magically heal, but because, for the first time in years, I was making choices based on possibility rather than fear. My phone buzzed almost immediately with a response. "Thank you. This means more than I can say. Would Sunday at 2 work? I want to hear about Oliver's art." I smiled, thinking about how my son's creativity had somehow become the thread connecting all these broken relationships, the bridge his father had recognized in him from the beginning, the superpower that was finally being seen. "Sunday at 2 works," I replied. "He has a lot to tell you." The days leading up to Sunday felt like waiting for an approaching storm, a mixture of anticipation and dread that made my stomach clench at unexpected moments. I found myself staring at old photos of Daniel that I'd kept hidden in a shoebox at the back of my closet. His face, so similar to Oliver's, stared back at me. The same expressive eyes, the same slight dimple in the left cheek when he smiled. I traced the outline of his jaw with my finger, remembering how it felt against my palm in those early days when love seemed like the only thing that mattered. Would his voice sound the same? Would he still use those thoughtful pauses before answering difficult questions? Would he still deflect emotional conversations with self-deprecating jokes? 9 years is a long time. People change. I had changed. Oliver had never known a world with his father in it. Not really, not beyond postcards and brief phone calls and that letter he'd carried like a talisman. I didn't tell Oliver about the scheduled call right away. I wanted to be certain it would happen before getting his hopes up. Daniel had disappeared before, had made promises he couldn't keep. But on Friday evening, as we sat at our kitchen table working on separate projects, Oliver on his graphic novel, me on a new essay, I decided it was time. "I have something to tell you," I said, closing my laptop. "I texted your dad about the postcard." Oliver's pencil paused mid-stroke. His eyes, suddenly wide, lifted to meet mine. "You did?" I nodded. "He's going to call on Sunday, at 2 o'clock. The pencil slipped from his fingers, rolling across the page. "For real? Like, a real call? Not just a birthday call?" "A real call," I confirmed. "He specifically said he wants to hear about your art." Oliver's face transformed with a smile so bright it made my chest ache. I had always tried to fill the void his father left, to be both parents, to make sure Oliver never felt the lack. But in that moment, I saw that some spaces can't be filled by anyone else, no matter how much love you pour into them. "Can I show him my graphic novel, even though it's not finished?" he asked, already gathering the pages, rearranging them, eyes darting critically over his work. "Of course," I said. "I think he'd love that." Oliver spent Saturday in a frenzy of creative energy, refining drawings, adding details, practicing what he would say. I watched him from the doorway of his room, his small body hunched over his desk, completely absorbed in preparation for a conversation that might last 15 minutes or might not happen at all. "Don't get your hopes too high," I wanted to say. People disappoint us, especially people who have disappointed us before. But I bit back the words. Who was I to limit his hope? Who was I to project my own fears onto his excitement? Instead, I said, "That panel with the ghost in the library looks amazing. The way you drew the light coming through him is really clever." He beamed at me over his shoulder. "Thanks. I'm trying to make it look like he's sort of see-through, but still there, you know?" "I know exactly what you mean," I said, "and you're nailing it." Sunday arrived with surprising calm. Oliver woke early, too excited to sleep. I found him already dressed at 7 in the morning, arranging his art supplies on the living room table. "We have hours still," I reminded him with a gentle smile. "I know," he said, not looking up from his meticulous organization. "But I want everything to be perfect." As the appointed hour approached, Oliver's excitement began to shift toward nervousness. He changed his shirt twice. He practiced introducing his graphic novel to the bathroom mirror. He kept checking the clock, then asking me to verify the time, as if one of us might have somehow misread the steady progression of minutes. At exactly 2 o'clock, my phone rang. Daniel's name appeared on the screen. I took a deep breath and answered, putting it on speaker. "Hello?" I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "Maya," he responded, and it was strange how a single word, my name and his voice, could uncork so many memories. "Thank you for this." Oliver, perched on the edge of the sofa, stared at the phone with an intensity that made my heart ache. "Oliver's here with me," I said. "You're on speaker." A pause, one of those thoughtful ones I remembered so well. "Hey, buddy," Daniel said finally, his voice gentler now, a little uncertain. "It's really good to talk to you." Oliver's hands gripped his knees. "Hi, Dad," he replied, the words coming out in a rush of breath. What followed was awkward at first, the halting conversation of strangers who are supposed to be family. Daniel asked about school. Oliver gave one-word answers. I sat quietly, resisting the urge to smooth over the rough patches, to make this easier for both of them. Then Daniel asked about the graphic novel. "Your mom mentioned you're working on something, a story with ghosts?" And just like that, the dam broke. Oliver launched into an explanation of his project, the premise, the characters, the themes he was exploring. His hands moved animatedly as he spoke, even though Daniel couldn't see him. When he paused for breath, Daniel asked thoughtful questions that showed he was really listening. "That sounds incredible," he said when Oliver finished his explanation. "You know, I always loved drawing too. Though I was never as good as you sound, I ended up expressing myself through photography instead." "Mom said you were a photographer," Oliver replied. "She showed me some of your pictures once. They were really cool." I hadn't realized Oliver remembered that, a night years ago when I'd been feeling particularly raw, particularly missing Daniel's eye for beauty. I'd pulled out an old portfolio of his work and shown Oliver, trying to give him some connection to the father he barely knew. "I still am," Daniel said. "A photographer, I mean. It's part of my therapy, actually. My counselor suggested I reconnect with the things that used to bring me joy before." He trailed off, perhaps remembering he was speaking to his young son, perhaps unsure how much to reveal. "Before you got sick?" Oliver offered, with the directness only children can manage. Another pause. "Yeah," Daniel said finally, "before I got sick." The conversation shifted then, becoming somehow both lighter and more honest. Daniel talked about Seattle, about the small studio apartment he'd been living in for the past 2 years, the longest he'd stayed in one place since leaving us. He described his job at a printing shop, the photography exhibition he'd had at a local cafe, the support group he attended every Thursday. "It's taken me a long time to get stable," he said. "Too long. And I've missed so much." His voice caught, slightly on the last word. Oliver looked at me, uncertain how to respond to this glimpse of his father's emotion. I nodded encouragingly. "I kept all your postcards," Oliver said. "They're on my wall. The one from the mountain with the really pointy top is my favorite." "Mount Hood," Daniel supplied. "I climbed halfway up before I chickened out. Never had a head for heights." "Me neither," Oliver admitted. "I don't even like the top bunk at Ben's house when I sleep over." Daniel laughed, a real laugh, warm and surprised. "We have that in common then." They talked for over an hour. I excused myself partway through, giving them space for a conversation that didn't need my mediation. From the kitchen, I could hear Oliver's animated voice, the occasional laugh from Daniel, the natural rhythm they found in discussing art and fears and favorite movies. When the call finally ended, Oliver sat quietly for a moment, staring at the silent phone. "You okay?" I asked, rejoining him on the sofa. He nodded slowly. "He said he wants to call again next week. And maybe—" He looked up at me, eyes full of cautious hope. "Maybe someday he could visit? Not right away, but someday?" The question hung in the air between us. 9 years ago, I would have dismissed the possibility outright. Daniel was too unstable, too unreliable. But the man on the phone today had sounded different, more grounded, more aware of his limitations, genuinely committed to the slow work of rebuilding what he'd broken. "I think that's a possibility," I said carefully. "If he keeps doing the work he's doing, if he shows us over time that he's really changed." Oliver nodded, seeming satisfied with this measured response. "I think he has changed," he said with the simple faith of a child who wants to believe in second chances. "You heard him, right? He sounds better." "He does," I agreed. "But healing takes time, Oliver, for all of us." He gathered his art supplies, carefully organizing them into his case. "I'm going to finish the next chapter before he calls again," he announced, "so I can read it to him." As I watched him head to his room, purpose in every step, I was struck by how different this Sunday afternoon felt from any I could remember. There was a lightness in our apartment, a sense of something shifting, opening, expanding. Later that evening, after Oliver had gone to bed, my phone buzzed with a text from Daniel. "Thank you for today. He's amazing, Maya. You've done an incredible job with him. I know I don't deserve another chance, but I'm so grateful you're considering it. For what it's worth, I'm committed to being someone he can count on this time, and someone you can trust again, even if that takes years." I stared at the message for a long time, emotions swirling. It was the most direct acknowledgement he'd ever made of the pain he'd caused, of the magnitude of his absence. Part of me wanted to respond with anger, to list every sleepless night, every question from Oliver I couldn't answer, every milestone he'd missed. But another part, the part that had seen the joy on Oliver's face today, recognized that rage, however justified, wouldn't build the future my son deserved. "One day at a time," I texted back. "He is amazing, and he deserves a father who sees that and stays for it." The response came quickly. "I know. I'm going to be that father, if you'll let me try." I set the phone down without replying. Some questions didn't have immediate answers. Some journeys couldn't be mapped out in advance. All I knew was that we were on a new path now, one with no guarantees but full of possibilities I hadn't allowed myself to imagine. The next morning, I woke to find Oliver already at the kitchen table, working intently on his graphic novel. Sunlight streamed through our small window, catching the dust motes in golden suspension around his bent head. He looked up when I entered, his face alight with creative energy. "I figured out how to end the story," he announced. "The ghosts aren't just in the boy's head, but they're not exactly real either. They're like possibilities, things that could happen if he makes different choices." I poured myself a cup of coffee, considering this. "That's a really interesting concept. So they help him see different futures?" He nodded eagerly. "Yeah, and in the end he realizes he has the power to choose which future becomes real. That's his real superpower. Not seeing ghosts, but seeing possibilities." The wisdom in this struck me deeply. Wasn't that what we were all doing now? Seeing possibilities where before we'd seen only fixed outcomes, predetermined paths? "That's brilliant, Oliver," I said, meaning it completely. "Really profound." He beamed at the praise, then returned to his drawing with renewed focus. I watched him for a moment. This child who had somehow taught me more about resilience and hope than anyone in my adult life. My phone buzzed with an email notification, the literary agent responding to the sample chapters I'd sent her last. Weak. I'd been both anticipating and dreading her response, knowing it could shape the trajectory of the writing career I was cautiously building. I opened it with trepidation, scanning quickly through the professional greeting to the heart of the message. "Your voice is unique and compelling. The raw honesty with which you address single parenthood, complicated family dynamics, and finding identity beyond traditional expectations resonates deeply. I'd love to discuss representation and how we might develop this into a full manuscript." My breath caught. This wasn't just a polite acknowledgement. This was an open door, an invitation to step fully into the identity as a writer that I'd been circling for months. "Good news?" Oliver asked, noticing my expression. "Very good news," I confirmed. "The agent liked my writing. She wants to talk about turning it into a book." Oliver's eyes widened. "You're going to be an author? Like a real one with books? In stores?" I laughed. "It's a long process, but maybe, eventually." "That's so cool," he exclaimed. "Can I tell Dad next time he calls? And Grandpa at dinner?" The casual way he linked these once separate worlds, his father, his grandfather, our Sunday routines, made me realize how quickly he was adapting to our new reality, how naturally he was weaving together the fragments of our family into something new. "Of course you can," I said. "I think they'd both like to hear about it." The week that followed unfolded with a sense of momentum I hadn't felt in years. I scheduled a call with the literary agent. I submitted another essay to an online publication that had published my work before. I even began researching local writing groups, considering the possibility of community beyond the digital connections I'd cultivated. Sunday dinner at my father's house was still awkward in places, but increasingly punctuated by moments of genuine connection. Oliver proudly announced my potential book deal, which prompted my father to reveal, somewhat stiffly, that he had once harbored ambitions of writing legal thrillers in the Grisham tradition. "What happened to that dream?" I asked, genuinely, curious about this previously unknown facet of my father. He shrugged, uncomfortable with the attention. Life, responsibilities, the practical concerns of raising a family. His eyes met mine briefly. I chose security over passion. It seemed like the right decision at the time. The admission hung in the air between us. Not quite regret, but a recognition of roads not taken, of choices that shaped not just his life, but the values he had imposed on his children. Later, as we were leaving, he pressed a small, wrapped package into Oliver's hands. "For your art," he said gruffly. "Something I thought might be useful." In the car, Oliver tore open the paper to reveal a professional set of drawing pens, the expensive kind I'd never been able to justify purchasing. "Wow," he breathed, running his fingers over the sleek case. "These are amazing." I stared at the gift, thinking about what it represented. Not just an acknowledgement of Oliver's talent, but a tangible investment in his creative future. From my father, who had spent decades prioritizing practicality over passion, it felt like a profound statement. The second call with Daniel went even better than the first. Oliver read him the newest chapter of his graphic novel. Daniel shared photographs he'd taken that week, texting them so Oliver could see the play of light and shadow he was experimenting with. They made plans to talk again the following Sunday. "Do you think," Oliver asked cautiously toward the end of the call, "that maybe you could help me with the photography part of my art class next month? Not in person, but with tips and stuff. We're supposed to learn about composition." The question clearly caught Daniel by surprise. I could hear the emotion in his voice when he responded, "I'd love that, buddy. I could send you some examples, maybe even put together a little guide for you." After the call ended, Oliver was quiet, a contemplative expression on his face. "What are you thinking about?" I asked. He looked up at me, his eyes serious. "I'm thinking about how people can change. Really change, not just say they're going to." I sat beside him on the sofa. "What makes you believe your dad has really changed?" Oliver considered this carefully. "He listens now. He remembers stuff I tell him. And he doesn't make big promises he can't keep. He just does small things. But he actually does them." The observation was remarkably astute. Daniel's previous attempts at reconnection had always been characterized by grand gestures, followed by disappointing disappearances. This new approach, consistent, modest, focused on Oliver's needs rather than his own desire for forgiveness, felt fundamentally different. "Those are really good things to notice," I told him. "Those small, consistent actions often mean more than big promises." He nodded, then asked the question I'd been waiting for. "Do you think you can forgive him? Not for me, but for you?" The directness of it took my breath away. My instinct was to deflect, to give some vague, protective answer. But Oliver deserved better than that. "I'm working on it," I said honestly. "Forgiveness isn't just a decision. It's a process. I've been angry for a long time and that doesn't just disappear overnight. But I'm open to seeing who he is now, not just who he was then." Oliver seemed to accept this. "That makes sense. Like in my story, seeing the possibilities, not just the past." I smiled, once again struck by the wisdom in his young perspective. Exactly like that. That night, after Oliver went to bed, I sat at my laptop and opened a new document. For weeks, I'd been circling around a difficult chapter of my book, the one about Daniel's departure, about the years of single parenthood that followed. I'd approached it from angles of anger, of abandonment, of the practical challenges of raising a child alone. But none of those approaches had quite captured the complexity of the experience. Now, fingers hovering over the keyboard, I began to write from a different perspective, not about what was lost, but about what was found in that space of absence. The strength I hadn't known I possessed. The relationship with Oliver that might have developed differently had our family taken another shape. The identity I'd forged not in spite of being left, but through the process of rebuilding afterward. The words flowed until well past midnight, filling page after page with a narrative that wasn't about victimhood, but about transformation. It wasn't about forgetting or excusing the pain, but about recognizing how that pain had shaped me into someone I might never have become otherwise. When I finally stopped writing, exhausted but exhilarated, I realized I'd just completed the most honest work of my life. Not because I'd cataloged every hurt, every struggle, every moment of despair, though those were acknowledged, but because I'd finally found a way to tell the whole truth. That damage and growth can occur simultaneously, that loss and discovery can be two sides of the same experience. I saved the document and closed my laptop, feeling as though something long knotted inside me had begun, ever so slightly, to unravel. Not completely, not all at once, but enough to let me breathe more deeply than I had in years. The next morning, I called the literary agent earlier than our scheduled appointment. When she answered, I said without preamble, "I've figured out the heart of the book. It's not about being left. It's about what happens after, about how we rebuild ourselves from the pieces, how we learn to see possibilities instead of just absences." She was quiet for a moment, then said, "That's exactly the book the world needs. Not another story of victimhood, but one of transformation." "When can I see the new pages?" "By the end of the week," I promised, certain now of the path forward. As I hung up, I noticed Oliver standing in the doorway of my bedroom, already dressed for school, his backpack slung over one shoulder. "Everything okay?" he asked. I smiled at him. This child who had been at the center of every major decision of my adult life, who had taught me more about courage and resilience than he would ever know. "Everything is better than okay," I told him. "I think we're both figuring out our stories." He grinned, understanding immediately. "The real superpowers," he said, echoing the theme of his graphic novel. "Seeing possibilities." "Exactly," I agreed. "Now let's go make some of them real." The seasons changed. Leaves turned from green to gold, then fell in swirling dances to carpet the ground. The air grew crisp, then cold, then softened again into the tentative warmth of early spring. Through it all, our new reality took shape, not in dramatic revelations or perfect resolutions, but in small, steady moments that accumulated like brushstrokes on a canvas, gradually revealing a picture I'd never imagined possible. Daniel's weekly calls with Oliver became a fixture in our lives, a Sunday afternoon ritual that my son anticipated with a calendar on his wall, marking off the days. Each conversation built upon the last, creating a relationship that was new. Rather than recovered, they weren't trying to reclaim what had been lost, but building something different, something honest. 3 months into these calls, Daniel made a careful suggestion. "I have some vacation time saved up. I was thinking maybe I could visit. Just for a day or two, if you both feel ready for that." Oliver looked at me, eyes wide with hope, but also understanding. We had established a new family rule. Big decisions required honest conversations, not immediate answers. "We'll talk about it and let you know," I said, appreciating how Daniel didn't push, didn't make Oliver feel responsible for the answer. Later that evening, Oliver and I sat at our kitchen table with mugs of hot chocolate, having what we'd come to call our family meetings. "What do you think about your dad visiting?" I asked, watching his face carefully. Oliver stirred his chocolate thoughtfully. "I want to meet him. In person, I mean. Not just on the phone." He looked up. "But only if you're okay with it, Mom." I reached across the table to squeeze his hand. "This isn't just about what I'm okay with. It's about what's right for both of us." "But you'd have to see him too," Oliver pointed out. "And that might be hard." His consideration for my feelings never failed to amaze me. At 12, he had developed an emotional intelligence that many adults never achieved, an ability to hold space for perspectives beyond his own. "It would be an adjustment," I admitted. "But I think I'm ready to try if you are." Oliver nodded decisively. "Then let's do it. But maybe not here? Not in our apartment. At least not the first time." I understood his instinct. Our home was our sanctuary, the space we had created together. Introducing Daniel into that intimate environment felt like too much, too soon. That's smart thinking, I agreed. What if we meet somewhere neutral? Maybe that park by the lake. It has those picnic tables, and you could show him your favorite climbing tree. Oliver's face brightened. Yeah, and if it gets weird or anything, we can just leave. Exactly. We set the terms, we maintain our boundaries, we see how it goes. The next day, I texted Daniel with our decision. We arranged for him to visit. On a Saturday 3 weeks away, enough time for all of us to prepare emotionally, but not so far out that anxiety could build to unmanageable levels. In the days leading up to the visit, I found myself unexpectedly nervous, not just about seeing Daniel again, but about how reality might compare to the connection Oliver had begun to form with his father through their calls. Phone conversations could be edited, curated. In-person interactions were messier, more revealing. What if he's disappointed? I confided to Leah over coffee the week before the visit. Our sisterly relationship had been slowly rebuilding, one vulnerable conversation at a time. In Daniel? She asked. Or in the experience, I clarified. He's built up this image of his father over the years, filled in the gaps with his imagination. What if the real person doesn't match? Leah considered this, stirring her latte. Oliver's pretty grounded, she said finally. More than most kids his age. And he's going into this with eyes open, right? You've been honest with him about Daniel's struggles. As honest as I could be in age-appropriate ways. Then trust him to navigate this, and trust yourself to support him through whatever happens. She reached across the table to squeeze my hand. Besides, from what you've told me, Daniel seems to have done a lot of work on himself. He might surprise you both. Her words stayed with me throughout the week, a reminder that growth was possible not just for Daniel, but for all of us. In how we related to each other, in how we handled expectations and disappointments. The Saturday of Daniel's visit dawned clear and mild, one of those perfect spring days that seemed designed for new beginnings. Oliver was up early, changing his shirt 3 times before settling on a blue button-up with his favorite jeans. Do I look okay? He asked, standing in my doorway as I finished braiding my hair. You look perfect, I assured him. Just be yourself. That's who your dad wants to see. We arrived at the park 30 minutes early, a mutual decision to give ourselves time to settle, to claim the space as ours before Daniel arrived. Oliver immediately gravitated to his favorite climbing tree, scaling its lower branches with practiced ease. I'm going to show Dad how high I can go, he called down to me. Do you think he'll be impressed? I think he'll be terrified and impressed in equal measure, I laughed. Just like I am every time. I spread a blanket under the tree, arranging the picnic lunch I'd packed, trying to keep my hands busy to distract from the knot of tension forming between my shoulders. 9 years since I'd seen him in person. 9 years of building a life. Without him, of learning to be complete in his absence. At exactly noon, I spotted a figure walking across the park toward us. Even at a distance, I recognized the way he moved. That slight hesitation in his stride, as if constantly checking to make sure he was heading in the right direction. Some things hadn't changed, but other things had. As he drew closer, I noticed the differences. Hair shorter and neater than the wild curls he'd worn in his 20s, shoulders straighter, face more weathered but somehow more settled. The Daniel I had known had always seemed slightly unfinished, a sketch rather than a completed portrait. The man approaching us looked more defined, more present in his own skin. Mom, Oliver whispered urgently from above. He's here. I nodded, standing up, brushing imaginary wrinkles from my jeans. I see him. Oliver scrambled down from the tree, landing with a soft thud beside me. His hand found mine, squeezing tightly. Daniel stopped a few feet away, his eyes moving from me to Oliver and back again. There was wonder in his expression, and nervousness, and something else. A deep, quiet joy that had nothing to do with happiness and everything to do with gratitude. "Hi," he said simply. "Hi," Oliver replied, his voice higher than usual with excitement. I just nodded, not trusting my voice yet. Daniel didn't try to hug either of us, respecting the invisible boundary we'd established. Instead, he gestured to the blanket. "This is nice. Great spot." "Oliver picked it," I said, finding my voice. "It's his favorite place in the park." "I can see why," Daniel responded, looking up at the massive oak tree with its sprawling branches. "That's quite a climbing tree." "I can go really high," Oliver informed him proudly. "Want to see?" And just like that, the ice was broken. Oliver led Daniel to the tree, showing him the best footholds, the sturdiest branches. I watched from the blanket as my son guided his father through the skill he'd perfected over years of solo practice, years when there had been no dad to impress with his bravery. Yet there was no bitterness in Oliver's manner, no resentment for the lost time. He was fully present in the moment, taking what was offered now without dwelling on what had been missing before. I marveled at his capacity for joy, for his ability to open himself to this new relationship without reservation. The day unfolded with surprising ease. We ate lunch together, talking about ordinary things: Oliver's school projects, Daniel's photography, books we'd all enjoyed. Daniel had brought a professional camera, which he showed to Oliver, patiently explaining the functions of different lenses, the principles of composition. "You have a great eye," he told Oliver, reviewing the practice shots our son had taken. "You're seeing patterns and connections that took me years to recognize." Oliver beamed at the praise. "I think it's because of drawing. You have to notice how things relate to each other, you know?" Daniel nodded thoughtfully. "That makes perfect sense. Different mediums, same fundamental skill, really seeing the world, not just looking at it." I watched their interaction from a slight distance, giving them space while remaining present. It struck me how similar they were in ways that went beyond physical appearance: the tilt of their heads when concentrating, the expansive gestures when explaining a concept they were passionate about. Later, as Oliver explored a nearby playground, Daniel and I sat on a bench, maintaining a careful distance between us. "Thank you for this," he said quietly, "for giving me a chance to know him, to know the person he's becoming." I nodded, watching Oliver scale the climbing structure. "He's an incredible kid." "Because of you," Daniel said. "I see how you are with him. Patient, attentive, really listening. You're an amazing mother, Maya." The compliment caught me off guard. "I've just been doing what needed to be done," I said, "taking one day at a time." Daniel shook his head. "It's more than that. You've created a relationship with him built on trust and honesty. That's not just doing what needs to be done. That's intentional, purposeful." I considered this, surprised by how accurately he had observed the core of my parenting philosophy. I never wanted him to feel like he had to be anything other than exactly who he is, I explained. The world will try to change him enough. Home should be where he can be authentic. "Even if that authentic self is a lot like me?" Daniel asked softly. The question hung between us, honest, vulnerable, getting directly to one of my deepest fears as a parent. "Even then," I said finally. "Especially then." I turned to face him directly. "I never tried to erase you from him, Daniel. Even when I was angriest, I never wanted him to feel like half of himself was something to be ashamed of." Daniel's eyes glistened. "That's more than I deserved." "It wasn't about what you deserved," I said truthfully. "It was about what he needed." We lapsed into silence, watching Oliver now engaged in an imaginary adventure around the playground. narrating to himself as he moved from one structure to another. "He's working on a graphic novel," I said. "Did he tell you the premise? About the ghosts as possibilities?" Daniel nodded. "It's remarkable. The way his mind works, finding connections, seeing beyond the obvious." "Like his father," I acknowledged. Daniel glanced at me, surprised by the recognition. "And his mother. You always saw more than most people, Maya. You saw something in me worth loving when everyone else had written me off." The statement wasn't manipulative or self-pitying. It was simply an observation, a recognition of our shared history. "I did love you," I said. It felt important to acknowledge this truth, to not rewrite our past into something smaller or less significant than it had been. It wasn't a mistake, even with everything that happened after. "I loved you too," he replied. "I just didn't love myself enough to be the person you deserved, the person Oliver deserved." Before I could respond, Oliver came running back to us, cheeks flushed with exertion. "Dad, there's a pond over there with ducks. Can we go see them? Before you have to leave?" The casual use of dad, not my father or Daniel, but the direct claim of relationship, made Daniel's breath catch audibly. He glanced at me, as if checking whether the term was acceptable. I nodded slightly. It was Oliver's choice what to call this man who was working to earn a place in his life. "I'd love to see the ducks," Daniel said, standing and offering his hand to Oliver, who took it without hesitation. I watched them walk toward the pond, their profiles so similar it made my heart ache with a complex emotion I couldn't quite name. Not quite grief, not quite joy, but something in between, a recognition of what had been lost and what might still be found. By the time Daniel had to leave to catch his train back to Seattle, something had shifted between all of us. Nothing dramatic, nothing that erased the past or guaranteed the future. Just a tentative bridge across years of absence, a possibility that we might find a way forward that included all three of us in some new configuration. "Can Dad come visit again?" Oliver asked as we drove home. "If that's what you want," I said. "How did it feel, spending time with him in person?" Oliver looked out the window, considering. "Different than I expected, but good different. He's quieter than on the phone. More." He searched for the word. "Present? Like he's really there with you, not thinking about other things." I nodded, understanding exactly what he meant. It had been one of the qualities that had first drawn me to Daniel all those years ago. His ability to be fully engaged in the moment, to make whoever he was with feel like the most interesting person in the world. It was only later that I learned how that intense focus could shift, leaving you suddenly in the cold when his attention turned elsewhere. "Did it feel weird for you?" Oliver asked, seeing him again after so long. I considered the question carefully. "It was strange at first," I admitted, "but less strange than I expected. He's changed in some ways, but in others he's very much the same person." "Is that good or bad?" I smiled at his perceptiveness. "Both, I think. The parts that have changed are mostly for the better, and some of the parts that are the same are what made him special to begin with." Oliver nodded, processing this. "I'm glad we did it," he said finally. "Even if it was complicated." "Complicated isn't always bad," I told him. "Some of the most valuable things in life are complicated." That night, after Oliver had gone to bed, I received a text from Daniel. "Thank you for today. It meant everything. Oliver is extraordinary. You've done a remarkable job raising him. I know we have a long road ahead, but I'm committed to walking it at whatever pace works for both of you." I read the message several times, noting the absence of grand promises or sweeping declarations. Instead, there was acknowledgement, gratitude, and a commitment to the process rather than an expectation of immediate results. "One step at a time," I texted back. Today was a good first step. In the months that followed, those steps continued, carefully, deliberately, but with increasing confidence. Daniel visited every 6 weeks, each time staying a bit longer, each time becoming more integrated into Oliver's life. He attended a school art show where Oliver's graphic novel pages were displayed. He joined us for Oliver's birthday dinner at a local pizza place. He and Oliver developed inside jokes, shared references, the small currencies of an evolving relationship. My own interactions with Daniel remained careful, cordial, defined by our shared commitment to Oliver rather than any attempt to revisit our past. Yet there was an ease developing between us, the comfortable familiarity of two people who had once known each other intimately and were now learning each other anew in a completely different context. Summer arrived with its long golden evenings and sense of expanded possibility. My book project had evolved from a collection of essays into a full memoir, with my agent's enthusiastic support. The writing process had become a kind of therapy, allowing me to examine the past from new angles, to recognize patterns I'd been blind to before. One particularly significant revelation came as I was working on a chapter about the early days with Daniel, how we'd met, fallen in love, created a life together that had felt magical until it began to unravel. I think I ignored warning signs. I told my therapist during our weekly session, not because I was naive, but because I wanted so badly to believe in the possibility of that life, one that was creative, unconventional, built on passion rather than pragmatism. You were reacting against your family's values, she suggested. Partly, I agreed. But it was more than rebellion. I genuinely believed in Daniel's vision, for his art, for our relationship, for the family we might build. And some of that vision was beautiful and worth believing in. It just wasn't sustainable in the form we tried to create. This realization that my relationship with Daniel hadn't been a mistake so much as an attempt to manifest something valuable in an ultimately unworkable form freed me from years of second-guessing. The problem hadn't been the dream itself, but the foundation we'd tried to build it on, one undermined by Daniel's untreated mental health issues and my own unexamined patterns. I shared this insight with Leah during one of our now regular sister dates. It makes me wonder if there's a way to honor what was genuine about that dream without repeating the mistakes, I mused. Leah studied me thoughtfully. You're not thinking of getting back together with him, are you? I laughed, surprised by the question. No, that's not what I mean. That chapter is closed. I'm talking about the larger vision, a life that makes space for creativity, for authenticity, for following. Passion alongside practicality. You're already building that life, Leah pointed out. Your writing, your parenting approach with Oliver, even how you're handling this new relationship with Daniel, it's all aligned with those values, just in a more sustainable way. Her observation struck me as profoundly true. Without realizing I had been reclaiming the elements of that early vision that truly mattered to me, but implementing them with the wisdom earned through years of challenge and growth. This understanding illuminated my path forward, not just in my personal life, but in my creative work as well. My memoir began to take shape around this central theme, how we can preserve the heart of our deepest dreams, even as we let go of the specific forms we once believed they had to take. As the summer progressed, my manuscript neared completion. Oliver's graphic novel grew more sophisticated, with Daniel providing long-distance guidance on visual storytelling techniques. And our family configuration continued its gradual, organic evolution. The most significant shift came in August, when Oliver asked if he could spend a weekend in Seattle with Daniel, his first overnight visit, his first time traveling alone to his father's home. "Are you sure you're ready for that?" I asked, concerned less about Daniel's reliability than about Oliver's emotional preparation for such a significant step. "I think so," Oliver said. "We talk all the time now, and I want to see where he lives, meet his friends from his photography group." He looked at me with those thoughtful eyes that seemed to see straight through pretense. I won't forget I live here with you, Mom. This is my home. I just want to know that part of my life, too. His maturity humbled me. At nearly 13, he was navigating this complex family dynamic with more grace than many adults could manage. Then we'll make it happen, I promised. Let's talk to your dad about the details. Daniel was appropriately cautious about the proposal, suggesting a highly structured visit with clear plans for each day, including video calls with me each morning and evening. His careful approach reassured me that he understood the significance of this step, that he wasn't taking Oliver's trust lightly. The weekend of the visit arrived with a flurry of preparations, packing, reviewing itineraries, checking and double-checking, flight details. I drove Oliver to the airport, my stomach tight with a mixture of anxiety and recognition that this was an important moment of growth for both of us. "You've got your phone fully charged?" I asked, for perhaps the 10th time as we approached the security checkpoint. Oliver nodded patiently. "And my portable charger. And Dad's number memorized. And yours. And Aunt Leah's as backup." I smiled, acknowledging my overprotectiveness. "I know you're prepared. This is new territory for me, too." "I'll be okay, Mom," he said, suddenly seeming older than his years. "And so will you." I hugged him tightly, then watched as he made his way through security, turning back once to wave before disappearing into the crowd. The weekend stretched long before me, the first time in nearly 13 years I had been completely alone. I had made plans to fill the time: dinner with Leah, a writing session with my newly formed writers group, a long-postponed visit to a museum exhibition. But in the quiet moments between activities, I found myself reflecting on the journey that had brought us here. From the devastation of Daniel's departure, through years of struggling to build a stable life for Oliver, to the unexpected opening that had begun with that family dinner and Oliver's brave reading of his father's letter, it had been a path I could never have anticipated, with lessons I wouldn't have chosen, but now couldn't imagine living without. On Sunday evening, I waited at the airport arrival gate, scanning the stream of passengers for Oliver's familiar form. When he appeared, his face lit up at the sight of me. He ran the last few steps, throwing his arms around me in an enthusiastic hug that swept away any worries about whether the visit might have changed something essential between us. "Mom, I have so much to tell you," he exclaimed as we walked to the parking garage. "Dad took me to this amazing photography exhibit, and then we went to this studio where his friend teaches classes, and I got to use a professional camera, and we went hiking by this lake that was so clear you could see all the way to the bottom." His excited chatter continued all the way home, a stream of new experiences, new connections, new understanding of the father who had been absent for so much of his life. As he unpacked his bag in his bedroom, he pulled out a carefully wrapped package. "Dad gave me this," he said, unwrapping it to reveal a framed photograph. Oliver standing on a dock, looking out over the lake he had just described, his profile captured in perfect golden light. "It's beautiful," I said, genuinely moved by the artistry of the image and what it represented. Daniel seeing our son, truly seeing him, and capturing that vision in a way that honored Oliver's contemplative spirit. "He said it reminded him of the letter he wrote me," Oliver explained, "about how I notice things others miss. He said this was me noticing." I traced the frame gently. "He captured you perfectly." Oliver set the photograph on his dresser, positioning it carefully among his other treasures: a model airplane from my father, a rock collection from Leah, drawings from his best friend Ben, the original copy of Daniel's letter. "I'm glad I have both," he said suddenly. "Both what?" I asked. "Both you and Dad. Different ways." He looked at me with those eyes that had always seen more than they should. "Some kids have parents who live together but don't really see them. I have parents who live apart but both really see me. That's better, I think." The wisdom of his observation left me speechless for a moment. This child, who had begun life in what the world would call a broken home, had somehow recognized the wholeness available even within that supposed brokenness. "I think you're right," I said finally. "The most important thing isn't the structure of a family. It's whether the people in it truly see each other." Later that night, after Oliver had gone to bed, I sat at my desk and opened my manuscript file, navigating to the conclusion I'd been struggling to write. In the glow of my laptop screen, the words finally came. Not a neat resolution to our story, which was still unfolding, but a recognition of what we had discovered along the way. "We are more than the labels assigned to us," I wrote. "Single, mother, absent father, child of divorce. These terms describe circumstances, not destinies. The real story lives in the spaces between categories, in how we choose to see ourselves and each other, in the possibilities we remain open to, in our capacity to begin again without erasing what came before. My son taught me this, standing tall in a room full of judgment, reading words his father had written before leaving us. He loved me. He loved my mom. That means I'm not a mistake." Simple truth from a child who refused to accept the narrative others had created about his existence. In that moment, he didn't just change how they saw him, he changed how I saw myself, not as a woman who had been left, but as one who had been loved, who continued to love, who built something valuable from what remained. Just as his father's letter had recognized the gift in Oliver's different way of seeing the world, Oliver helped me recognize the gift in our different kind of family. We don't need to fit conventional patterns to be whole. We don't need to deny past pain to embrace future possibility. And we don't need others to validate our worth to know it exists. These are the lessons written between the lines of our story, not in the moments of public drama or private despair, but in the quiet, ordinary miracle of continuing to see possibilities where others see only mistakes. I saved the document, feeling a sense of completion that went beyond the manuscript. Something had been healed, not erased or forgotten, but integrated into a larger understanding that could hold both the pain of the past and the promise of the future. The story wasn't over. There would be new challenges, new growth, new configurations of our unconventional family. But something fundamental had shifted, allowing all of us to move forward not as broken pieces, but as whole people, each carrying our own truth, each seeing and being seen for who we really were. And in that seeing, that recognition of each, others' authentic selves beyond labels and expectations, we had found something more valuable than the conventional family we'd never be. We had found a way to honor what was real in each of us, to build connections based on truth rather than obligation, and to transform what others called mistakes into the possibilities that would shape our future. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.